But I'm really happy to have all these inspiring individuals with me today, and we're going to go over some quick questions that I have prepared, and then we can open it up to you all in the audience. So this past weekend, actually, we had our Orange County High School Esports League finals. So it was season 1, and we had 25 schools and 38 teams compete in League of Legends. And so they had an 8-week regular season, and then we had a 2-weekend finals. And so this past weekend, we crowned Fountain Valley High School Gold as the season champions, which was really exciting. We had over 500 people at our final event in Esports Arena, Orange County, and it was a great way to end our inaugural year. But there's a lot that we do with our program. But first, I want to have everyone here introduce themselves, and then we'll go into questions.
So I'm Katie Salen. I'm a professor here in informatics at UC Irvine.
I'm Mimi Ito. I'm also a professor at UC Irvine and director of the Connected Learning Lab.
Constance Steinkühler, faculty here at informatics in UCI.
I'm Tom Turner. I'm Director of Instruction at the Orange County Department of Ed and the token male on the panel. So thank you for having me.
We had to have one.
We needed a diversity.
So we're actually going to have Tom answer this first question, but how would you define student success?
Well, it's interesting. I think a lot of our district partners would define student success as having attained the knowledge of standards, the content standards, and that they've mastered them, and on tests they scored like a meet or exceed those standards. That would be a measure of success because that's how districts are looked at. But I think for us, we know more about that, and we're looking for student success being self-efficacy, weaponizing the 4 C's, that collaboration, communication, critical thinking, creativity model. Also being flexible, lifelong learners. I think we would consider that a success for our students because we need to be adaptable. I think we're getting to that point where we need them to learn, students to learn everything, not just something.
Okay. And so then, do you want to go into gameplay a little bit?
Well, no, can I just add one more thing to that? So I think the other thing that the project was trying to do broadly was to legitimize kids' gaming interests in the context of high school. So high schools often have, sports teams, football teams, volleyball teams, other kinds of clubs, but gaming is often really marginalized. So this was partially an attempt to say, like, if you have an interest in gaming, it's just as valid as an interest as some other things, and there should be supports around it.
Yeah, and I think that orientation really grows out of this framework that we've been developing together around connected learning, which is really about how do you connect students' existing interests, identities, and affinities with what's happening in schools. So along the lines of what Tom was saying, it's not just about skills and knowledge in kids' heads, but really about how the learning can be about success, not just in school, but success in life and the communities that kids care about and their peer culture and the world at large. And I think esports was a really interesting opportunity to say, look, here's something that young people are super passionate about, where they're learning to collaborate, work with others, teamwork, all the collaboration skills that Tom was talking about. How can we actually connect that to success in school?
So then, what specific aspects of gameplay would you all say contribute directly to student success?
And they all look at me. I have to give a shout out to some of my research lab members because our lab was like the one that was sort of sitting on the sidelines doing field observations, looking at what was authentically coming up in the league. And number one, I can say that the findings that we made were pretty spectacular. I mean, overwhelmingly, it did legitimize students' interest in esports, and it did connect them to school. And as far as content, we can also show that the kinds of reading, writing, problem solving, mathematics, data analysis, all the way over to figuring out how to fundraise for your team, all of that was sort of just natural native part of what clubs did in order to support their team players. So I think that for parents and teachers and administrators, number one, they don't even know what esports is. So first, it was just a great introduction, but those who do know tend to focus only on the competing teams because the optics are so high. Like there's such, it's such fascinating to watch events and to see it streamed, et cetera. But behind the scenes is a whole additional community of participants and spectators that are deeply interested in supporting their team and do a lot of really interesting work around it. So some of the skills that we see pop up, I mean, they're the obvious ones around working together, collaborating, dealing with challenges and persevering, but also a lot of content standards that you might not have expected. So we saw ones that were related to data analysis and English language arts, expository writing, journalism, and also some career technical education skills around event management, web development, and IT support.
Great. So I think you kind of touched base on it already, actually, but so what's the connection between esports, student learning, SEL, and or the workforce? AKA everything.
I could build on what Constance said. So I think one of the assumptions of this league is that we know that the kinds of thinking, problem solving, interaction that kids get when they game socially with other kids, and also when you game in a competitive environment, leads to kinds of outcomes that we think are great, right, and viable within the context of a workforce. So when people talk about 21st century skills, they're some of the 4 C's. I don't know about that word weaponized, though.
Operationalize. We can
Operationalize the 4 C's. Being able to be a critical thinker, being able to resolve conflicts really productively, certainly being able to collaborate, to communicate, all of those things. When you talk about the workforce, those are skills that when you have an interview, that's what they care about. And so we know that gaming under the right conditions can lead to the development of some of those skills. And so the league was a beginning attempt to say, well, if we structured this in a way for kids within the institutional context of a school, we could maybe do work in really concrete ways around some of those things. The one layer we haven't talked about is that there were a layer of college coaches that worked with the kids virtually. And Mimi and I have a nonprofit called Connected Camps, and we were the ones that worked with the coaches and kind of trained them to work with the kids. And so there was also a very interesting layer of learning for these are college kids that are former pro players that were interested in working with young people. And they also developed a whole set of things in the context of working in this league. So when you talk to them about what they learned, they say, well, wow, I really learned about communicating with lots of different kinds of stakeholders. I had to communicate with the GM, which were the high school educators. I had to communicate with parents sometimes. I had to communicate with the kids. I learned a lot about conflict resolution, which is one of those SEL or socio-emotional learning skills that we care about. It's like, oh my God, this thing came up in the game. I had to teach a bunch of high school kids what to do when this happens. So there also was some pretty amazing kind of workforce learning happening in that layer of coaching, which was, I think, an interesting part of the league structure.
Yeah, and some of the, Katie and I have been doing ongoing research on just youth affinity networks, everything from anime fans to gamers to knitters on Ravelry.com. And one of the things that we find when people, not just young people, but humans, are engaged in real communities that they care about, where they're making authentic contributions, taking leadership roles, engaging in friendly competition, that these are environments that are really different from most school-based learning. But if you can connect it to school and the kind of recognition and validation that you get in school, it's incredibly powerful. So for all of you who have led student clubs or who have been able to bring projects that are being done outside of school into the school context, there's something uniquely special that happens when we can connect those worlds. I mean, sometimes it can go badly, but there's times when you don't want your fun to be contaminated by school all the time. But there's also ways to do it really well, and that's part of the alchemy that we've been trying to weave with this new project.
I think kind of gone unsaid here is we not just ran a league, but we wrote curriculum. So instead of taking 9th grade English, where you're going to read the classics and do what you do according to the content standards required by state law, we wrote it so that we rewrote 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade English courses that then weave in esports, the career technical ed of the ecosystem that surrounds esports, and then called out the science standards, the ISTE tech standards, as well as the social emotional learning components. So if you start high school in one of our pilot schools, in theory, instead of just taking regular old English 9, you could take this esports operationalized version of English, and you can get that same B credit that allows you to meet all your A through G requirements that allow you to attend an institution like this. So that was a big part of this, and we have friends in the room that help us put that whole curriculum together. And it's, but that is kind of the whole purpose of this question, is to integrate those things. That's the holy grail in education, is to integrate all of these different aspects, because that's what the real world is. It's not just, writing an essay, but it's writing an essay within the context of something else. So that's what we were trying to do, and I think that will really call out the specific type of learnings that you can get from something like esports.
Great. And I know that we piloted this curriculum through workshops this season. So does anyone want to talk about some of the things that we learned going through that process?
Sure. So we offered, I think it was 6 clinics total. We sort of started them in, I think, November, December, so over a period of about 2.5 months. We offered clinics on campus that were free for any students that were in the league or not. Had a great turnout, but we simply used it as an opportunity to bring kids to school, some of whom have never envisioned themselves as being college bound, and get them on campus, saying that the UCI has this lovely esports arena. And then, doing clinics on topics they really care about, like how do you overclock your machine, or how do you do a debrief after your gameplay to look at your data and figure out where you screwed up or what you could do better as a team. We had great turnout for those, and we used them as a way to pilot key activities in our curriculum. So again, it's kind of a radical proposition, but what we're trying to do is, I guess we're sort of using esports as a way to show how it is that all of this stuff in school is actually still relevant. Data will show that even kids that are doing really well in school see, in the US, they see school as really just credentialing. And, we're all sort of school-oriented academic nerds up here who actually think that's a travesty, right? Like when data or math becomes nothing but a way to get through a test, it's fairly lame for kids. So the proposition here is, how do you take what kids are already interested in? Esports doesn't need us to make esports awesome. It's already awesome. But part of what we're trying to do is to use esports as this context to make school relevant and to show how it is that, for example, they're saying where, like math, for example, becomes a way to cheat the game and get better, to actually boost your ability for something you care about. And the proposition is, however long their love of esports lasts, fantastic, terrific, but what will endure is the idea that that those content standards of what you're learning in school actually are helpful somewhere, that they're relevant somewhere, and that that you can leverage that later on in life and in the activities that you're doing. I have to also say this has been I think over $1 million investment from the Samueli Foundation. And just imagine for a minute, now that we just did our championships, we're all totally buzzed up here because we had the most awesome championship event at the Santa Fe Esports Arena possible. It was completely amazing. And
Thanks
I think
to
was
Sam
beyond all of our expectations. That was all Sam, who's like the commissioner and still trying to sleep off the hours that she missed of sleep the last week. But imagine, you have this foundation and their main mission is STEM and serving kids who are not very well served in school. And they took a really risky bet because they didn't know anything about esports. But when they saw some of the activity that kids were engaged in and how excited and passionate they were about it, they gave us a shot at trying to use it as this vehicle to do a connected learning model. And I think we're happy to say after the first year, it's got its bumps and its warts. We've got some things we still need to iron out, but it works.
Speaking of the wrinkles and the bumps, so what were some of the most in-our-face things that we learned this season?
I'd say that students love to game. So this, like we mentioned, you don't need to tell high school kids about esports. You need to tell the adults about it. And they look at you like, what? How are we going to put this on a campus? We're going to legitimize this with having the name of our school on their back. But as soon as you bring it up to students, there's no doubt they want to be involved, and they make it happen. So even if the school administrators look at you sideways, those high school kids, they know where to go on campus, they know who to talk to, and they know how to make it happen. And that's why we had the turnout we did. We were hoping for 15, 20 schools, ended up with 25 schools. Some schools needed more than one team. I learned the push, the energy behind the players, and I think that type of interaction is leading the work the rest of the way.
And one of the things that I was sort of pleasantly surprised about is, the fact that the educators and the parents actually went with this in so many of the schools. I mean, I'm old, so I've been doing games and learning stuff for over 20 years. And if you had asked me, like even 10 years ago, whether you would see a high school esports league that was sponsored by a major philanthropy, where you have educators like Tom embracing it, superintendents, principals, I would have thought you were crazy. So there was definitely pushback, but I think the culture is shifting, and I think young people have been at the forefront of sort of advocating and making that change and just doing it regardless of the institutional sponsorship. But we're finally at a moment where it's like, schools are ready. Parents are ready, not every parent, but enough that there's this momentum building, which is kind of amazing. It's a new moment.
Yes, I'll say 2 areas to build on. So one is that we knew going into the league that there was going to be a tension between the competitive team, which can basically house 5 or 6 kids, and a larger goal around participation, which would be the club model, where lots of kids can be part of the esports club and have things to do. So we saw over the course of the league that the emphasis was really on the competition piece. So 5 or 6 kids were really being served by a lot of the schools. And a lot of the other kids that were kind of around the edges wanting to be part, we didn't really have anything for them to do. So that's an area of growth for next year, is to think about this larger notion of what does it mean to be part of an esports club? How do we provide activities and cool things for those kids to do so they can benefit as well? Then what was the second one? So the second one is that we did have across the schools and teams competing quite a big diversity in terms of socioeconomic status among. We had some schools that were very, very poorly resourced and some schools that were very richly resourced. And what we know from just the research is that kids of means that go to richly resourced schools, like they have better computers, they have access to computers at home, lots of those kinds of things. Where kids are going to the more poorly resourced schools really have to scramble, right, to have even a lab to do stuff in, and they maybe don't have access to computers at home. And so that's a larger question of kind of equity that we need to look at and figure out how, if we want to enable participation by a larger number of kids, that's a piece we're going to have to look at, how to, work with partner organizations to support, kids more broadly.
I thought one interesting tension that came up was that, for students, for this to be a legit league, there needs to be a purse prize and corporate sponsorship. And so for our foundation that was supporting it, they were like, oh, we're not really ready to have that conversation. But the kids were like, that's what makes this legit. So I can imagine that, like, as we move it forward, trying to think about how to bring in partners that can bring that momentum in a way that's also aligned with our mission and not sort of, siphoning off energy, I think will be a piece that we'll have to think about. I would say that, so we did, Jason, who's here, finished a landscape analysis, because there are now almost 12 total, I think, efforts that are high school esports leagues. And we asked them, like, okay, so how are you thinking about it connected to school? What's up there? And then, like, what do you see as, like, your frictions and barriers? The 2 biggest patterns we saw, one was that no other league was actually attempting to make it educational. If you want to work in schools, you have to at least wave your hands and say, yay, it's going to be educationally-ish, kind of, right? Which I don't mind. So we were the only one that was actually, like, really putting a lot of effort on making sure that it actually had educational content baked into it in a legitimate way. And 2, every other league reported problems with parents and administrators, like just getting access and on board. And we didn't have any of that. And I would say that those 2 things are related. The fact that we actually could show that we were taking it pretty seriously, the educational outputs of it, I think was one of the reasons that, like, parents and teachers and principals and whatever were sort of like, okay, let's give it a go. This sounds great.
Yeah, the biggest issue we had with districts was actually the IT folk.
Yeah.
They don't want to change their protocols about what sites are whitelisted and what ports can be opened up, and is Discord really going to work as they don't want to hear anything about that. But they're all gamers, so we sat in a room, Sam and I, with all of the IT people around the county, and they kind of drilled us with these questions, like, I love gaming, however, it took us an entire week to rewrite our, we don't want to hear that. But then when you've ticked off the IT people, that means you're on the right path. We realized at that moment this was a movement.
And even with them, they've given us a green light, for moving forward to season 2. Just come into our meeting, talk to us, let's work on this together, as opposed to just getting mad at us for what we did for season 1. So as we head into season 2, though, what are some of the questions that we're most looking forward to finding out?
Well, I would second Katie's flagging of the equity piece, because esports, at least the competitive side, is still a fairly elite and challenging kind of scene to break into. And so now that we're working with schools, we have this incredible opportunity to broaden the base of invitations that kids have to participate in this community. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. I think there's a ton of work we have to do to make that actually something that's welcome and open and inclusive to kids who might not see themselves currently as part of the scene. And I think the other piece is just to continue to grow the ecosystem of organizations, individuals, partners to support this happening in a broad-based way through schools. We really realized doing this that, we have a ton of support in our small community and partnership, but there's, compared to traditional athletics, we're really in early days in terms of, schools don't recruit faculty looking for esports coaches. They don't have, other organizations in the community that offer esports after school for kids. Like, all these things that are taken for granted with traditional athletics still don't exist within the ecosystem. So it's definitely not just about our group or just the schools or just the school and the university, but it really requires a much broader set of partnerships. I think that's one of the bigger challenges we're facing next.
So our foundation, we're going to expand. So we piloted here in Orange County, and we started late, like in November. We didn't actually sign people up till January, right? No, that's not true.
December.
Is that true? Oh my God, I blacked that out. I did. I was like, no, that can't possibly be true. So we had to hit the ground running. I would say, we're going to scale to all of California in the fall, which, let's just stick with the buzz of a fantastic championship and not think about the scaling problems. That's going to be massive. And I guess I'm just looking at, this has been a really terrific day here, and meeting so many people in this arena is pretty exciting. And so I guess I would just say, we're going to go for California starting in fall, and the next year national. And that's the ambition that we have. And it's audacious, and we're going to go after it because we're audacious, and we're going to make it happen. But it would be great to have partners. So if you are, interested in this kind of area, I guess I would just say, come talk to us, because the only way to pull something like this off is to have really wonderful people who want to work on it with us, and it's ambitious.
And I think that's all the time we have. I'm getting a nod saying yes. Okay, so that is all the time that we have for today. But like Constance said, come talk to us. I have my business cards out here in the front, including some leftover goodies from this past weekend. But yeah, thank you all for coming to our panel, and please give everyone a round of applause.